Good afternoon and welcome to our new webinar series, Definity Live, Run, Improve, Grow Your Business, the webinar series focused on bold, relevant leadership. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Dave Hatter, series host and a solutions architect here at Definity Partners. We're thrilled to kick off our program today with Ray Attiyah, author of Your Frontline and founder of Definity Partners. Ray has a long and distinguished track record helping organizations just like yours run, improve, and grow their business by transforming their culture and allowing leaders and managers to focus on improving and growing their business rather than being involved in the day-to-day run. We know that may sound like a distant dream to some, so we've designed this series to deliver practical ideas and actionable advice that will help you transform your organization into a thriving environment where your teams actually run the day-to-day activities. And our goal is for you to walk away with ideas and plans that you can start implementing in your company today. One quick bit of housekeeping. Ray is here to answer your questions, so please send them in during the interview. He'll be happy to answer as many as possible. Now, without further ado, let me welcome Ray Attiyah. Thanks for joining us today, Ray.
Oh, thank you, Dave. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Hey, Ray, when you're out in the trenches talking to and working with leaders in the front line, from large manufacturing facilities to small service organizations, what are the top challenges and obstacles facing our leaders today?
You know, Dave, right now, many of the challenges is they need to really innovate and grow their business in bolder ways, because as the market has shrunk in terms of demand, they need to find new ways to get new revenue sources. At the same time, the improvements in their organizations are more complicated than ever before, so they're looking for bigger improvements that cross over many different departments. And finally, they're trying to create an environment that their best and brightest stay engaged. So they're trying to accomplish all three of those, where in the past, you could be good at one or two of them and still do well. Now it's cutting across the whole organization to collaborate, innovate, and keep it a very engaging organization. So the challenge is they're being asked to do things that they've never done before and do it while the train is moving.
Yeah, which obviously makes things complicated and difficult. You mentioned environment. And it seems like in today's workforce, there are a lot of challenges finding folks and getting the right kind of people on board. What type of culture would you say is the most productive, and how do you go about achieving that kind of culture in an organization?
A client of mine years ago told me, he said, we rent people's hands and their backs, but they have to volunteer their hearts, their minds, and their imagination. So to me, a strong culture is one that people behave in a very ABC way. They're authentic, they're bold, and they're collaborative. But also, they take action. So for me, when I look at a culture, it's really defined by the predominant behaviors. So when I see the front line owning and taking action on a daily basis, that means they're supported, they have the leadership. If I see a leadership team having the confidence to go out and create bold initiatives for growth, it means that they not only have a good running organization, they have the vision of where the future of the business is going. So a strong culture does all three of those all the time, but one that really trusts its employees, gives them autonomy, and also puts the systems in place to ensure reliable performance.
So we talked a lot about culture here in this last question. And for organizations that are really intrigued by the idea of building that kind of culture where their leaders can focus on improvement and growing rather than being out there firefighting day to day. How does that work best? Can it happen from the bottom up, or does it have to start from the top down, or is it best to try and have it come both ways and meet in the middle somehow? What do you see out there?
Well, I see things not in one dimension. It's really the way that you change a culture is you change a culture through a positive experience. I remember working with a company in 2009 that they were going through in the automotive industry, and they were going through one of the most challenging periods of their time. General Motors and Chrysler were going bankrupt. Their business dropped 40% in sales in about 2 weeks, and the organization was scared. However, their outlook in the future was changing. Their customers were challenged, but the leaders saw the opportunity to really use that as a tipping point to create a new culture. So the way that we designed a solution was to create a positive experience that the team learned how to win together. I think the way that you change a culture is you create a positive experience that changes people's mindset and removes some of the cynicism that makes them think that you can't change. So back to your question, do you do it from the top down, bottom up, and so forth? I see it as you're doing it across the whole organization. You're breaking down the silos. You're improving the relationship between a frontline employee and their supervisor. You're changing the mindset of the owner, the president, to say, you know what, my folks have great ideas. As I mentioned to you, that quote from that client about people volunteering their hearts, their minds, and imaginations. That came from him seeing a 30-year employee bring up ideas and act on it that he never thought that person was capable of doing. That person did it because he saw his supervisor giving him the room to at least try his idea without getting smacked over the head. So I think that this culture has changed through many positive experiences across the whole organization.
So it sounds like what I think I hear you saying is, realistically speaking, you know, it could go either way, it could go both ways, but it's probably best if everyone kind of gets on board with this and everyone sort of takes a chance, because I could see where you would potentially have a lot of resistance to people who've been there or resistance from people who've been there a long time, don't believe it, they're skeptical, they've heard it all before. How do you break down their resistance and get people on board? Yeah, I love that quote. The journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step, and it sounds like if each side starts making steps, you can eventually get there. So how do you get those people who probably would be great contributors but are resistant on board?
Well, and my, I guess, experience tells me don't spend time trying to get the resistors on board. What you want to get is your top performers even more committed. Too often we spend a lot of our time trying to win over people who don't want to be won over. However, we have some pretty strong advocates in our organization that care a lot, but we've lost them for many reasons. So my suggestion and my approach is find your top performers. So when I do seminars, I ask folks to make a list of your top 10%. If you're going to start a brand new company all over again, who would you start with? Who would you take? And then sit down with them and ask them a very simple question. What frustrates you on a daily basis? If you ask those top performers what frustrates you on a daily basis and start removing the obstacles, and I call them speed humps, that slow them down, that begins to change the experience for them, but it also allows the people who are in the middle group, your followers, to have a new model of excellence. So I don't subscribe to the model of trying to get your poorest performers up to average. If you really want to raise the bar, take your top performers and show them that they can actually succeed at a higher level. When you do that, it changes the beliefs of management that people need to be managed. Instead, we start becoming leaders, and we remove the amount of activities we do, meetings, memos, emails, conference calls, because then we trust our people, and then we build the organizational systems around our top performers. To me, that's the way that you start the journey of creating a high-performance organization.
So on the road to trying to achieve that, my guess is along the way you're going to run into some leaders who might not potentially buy entirely into this theory. What would you tell them to get them on board with this? How based on all of your experience, you know, how would you approach them to get them to buy into this and take this journey?
Well, first you've got to understand why they're resistant to it. You know, there's one group of people that you can never win over, and that's the group that I try to qualify and recognize that they can't be won over, and that's people who don't believe in people. If there's a leader or manager who doesn't believe that people want to do the best that they can do, if there's a leader who believes that people come to work and are trying to steal from them, what I mean by that is they're trying to do as little work as possible, those managers I don't believe can be won over. So as an organization, you have to recognize that and you deal with that. Typically, the managers who struggle, they don't understand what their future work looks like. So if I trust my people to run the business without me, what do I do? What do I work on?
Sure.
That's one of the biggest challenges that we see many times in the frontline supervisors and the middle managers. The other struggle is many supervisors, frontline supervisors, they have been promoted because of their technical skills. We've taken a phenomenal technical master and made him into a mediocre supervisor. And they themselves don't want to lead people. They would rather be the firefighter. So one of the areas that you have to look at is decide, is that the right role for that person? And the final one is the managers. A lot of managers really thrive on running the business. That's where they get their kudos, and that's where they get their heroic badges. They're awesome firefighters. Many times they're also arsonists that cause their own fires. But I think that the organization then has to change by changing what we reward. Instead of by patting them on the back for putting out that fire, we got to start patting people on the back for preventing the fire. So the way that you start the process is you have to try to give some room for improvement for your frontline. And one of the ways that we like to do it is a daily huddle. You give your folks an opportunity every day to contribute and see how their performance impacts the business. So the one way to start it is really starting off with what went well huddles. And the what went well huddles really create an environment for people to feel respected and to contribute. Too often when we talk to folks about numbers and performance, we jump to the negatives. And that creates a very disrespectful and confrontational conversation. It doesn't allow us to collaborate. And then people start defending their position why they can't do certain things. So to start the process to get managers on board is for them to see their people really care. And that's one way of doing it.
And I know you're a big fan of trying to get quick wins along the way. So could you give us an example, like you mentioned what went well in the huddles, and in my mind that's a minor example of a quick win, right? You get people on board with the here's what went well as opposed to this more confrontational thing. But what are some good examples of quick wins that someone could walk away with today and think about how they might try to achieve some of those in their organization as they try to move in this direction?
You know, speaking of the huddle, I use this in my presentations, this example. There was a lady at one of our clients here that she came to the huddle about the fourth day of the process of having these huddles in place, and she had a scrunched up on the front of piece of paper here. She had it in her pocket that as they're going through the huddle, the supervisor was asking, so who else has any other ideas? Almost toward the end of it, she stopped and said, you know what, last night at my dining room table, I started putting together some ideas. She takes it out and says, you know, we're packaging this product in this extra packaging. I don't think we need to do that. The supervisor cut her off right away and said, no, we've already asked sales about that. They told us we have to do that. She didn't even get through her first item, and she was already cut off. Fortunately, one of our rig leaders intervened and said, tell me more about what your idea is. So she started, a little sheepishly, continued to share her idea about, we're adding this extra packaging doesn't make sense. The supervisor and the rig leader went to sales and had a salesperson come out and talk to her and had her explain to them her idea. And in the past, they did ask sales if they could do that, and the answer was, no, it'll be hard. In this case here, the salesperson took the extra effort and said, you know what, that's a good idea. Let me call the customers. I think 80% of the products we can eliminate doing that extra step. But these other 20%, it requires us to do it because our customers want us. But let me call the customer and check with them. So about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he comes out and says, I called the customers, the 2 customers, and they were fine with us removing that. So when you talk about a positive win, there was no numbers associated to that. That wasn't a, let me show this new spreadsheet and so forth. What that was, it was a win that the person felt their idea were heard, and it was a win that broke down some of the silos and the barriers between the two. And it was also a win that didn't do it in a disrespectful way to the supervisor, because he was right. Sales did tell us no before, because we never kept asking the next question, which is, well, what will it take? Right. So when you create an organization that can switch from we can't to start asking the question, what will it take? There's an example of a quick win. When people feel their ideas are heard and acted upon quickly, like within 5 hours, that's a quick win.
Okay. So out there on the front line, when you're trying to find these folks to take this on, what kind of traits are you looking for? How do you know when you've got a frontline leader that actually is up to the challenge? And how do you find those folks? How do you know you got one?
So when I look at frontline leaders, First of all, the number one role of frontline leader above anything else is to develop people. That is the number one role of a frontline leader. Frontline leaders lead 80% of our workforce. So if you look at most organizations, 4 out of 5 employees are frontline employees. You know, I've been doing this now for almost 20 years. The math works out. Those frontline supervisors represents about 5% of the workforce. So one of the reasons why that role is so critical, because they lead 80% of the culture. So one of the number one traits that you're looking for in a frontline leader is their ability to develop people. That they measure themselves about the success of their people. So I'll give you an example with one company in Columbus, Ohio. There was 2 supervisors in the general area. The company said this one supervisor is going to be phenomenal. This other one, we're really not sure if he's going to make it. Turns out the one who they thought was not going to make it turned out to be one of the best leaders I've ever seen. His challenge was he didn't have a very good scheduling system. Materials weren't there on time for him. He wasn't able to really lead. Instead, the other person was rewarded because he was a phenomenal firefighter. He made sure work got out the door. So the organization never really measured their ability to develop their people. Instead, they measured it by, did you make sure the work got out? Once those systems were improved, then it was time to say, who can lead? And the gentleman who was the phenomenal supervisor leader, he now is over 5 areas, but spending his time getting to know all of his folks and giving them training plans about what they want to work on. So when I look at leaders, do they spend their time on developing our most valued asset, which is our people? That is the number one trait that I look for in a frontline supervisor.
And we use the term fearless frontline leaders. What does that really mean to you? When you say fearless in this context, what does it mean?
So as you can see, my bio is up there and it says I'm a poker player, not a gambler. So to be in poker, you got to be fearless, but there's a difference between being fearless and being reckless. So too often people misconstrue that. So fearless means that you're not inundated with paralysis. You're not spending time thinking about something but not acting. You know, when you're fearless, you act instinctively. You know, your instincts kick in. You know what's right. You know what's broken, and you have confidence in yourself to take action. A fearless frontline supervisor doesn't say, well, I don't know why they won't let me do this. I'm sorry. When a fearless frontline supervisor doesn't complain that he's a victim or she's a victim of corporate policy. A fearless frontline leader doesn't blame other departments for their issues. They see it as their role to help fix it. So when somebody's fearless, they're not sitting back and complaining. They're taking action. And whether it's a fearless frontline, whether it's a fearless frontline leader, they own the success. They hold themselves accountable. You know, one of the things that everybody talks about, we need to hold people accountable. My belief should be even greater than that. I don't believe the goal should be to hold people accountable. I believe that a fearless frontline leader holds themselves accountable to a higher standard than anybody can ever hold them to. So when I look at fearless frontline leaders, and I've been fortunate to see them develop, they truly have confidence in their own ability, and they don't allow other people's, roadblocks to prevent them from succeeding.
So we use the term accountability a lot. You mentioned confidence as well. It seems like to me another big part of this would be trust, right? You have to have mutual trust between the leaders and the frontline folks to get the job done. Talk a little bit about trust and how it fits into this model and why it's so important.
Well, trust and accountability come hand in hand because in the word accountability, if you look inside of it, there's the word count. And what it really means is I can count on you. Can I count on you? And there's different levels of trust. So one level of trust is, do I trust you're honest? Do I trust that you're, acting with good intent? The answer could be yes. However, can I trust you to actually follow through with everything you said? And that's a higher level of confidence. So when I have confidence in somebody, that creates a very, very inspiring work environment. And, trust is a lubricant of the most efficient systems. So when I can trust somebody and I have confidence in them, I don't spend my mental energy, I don't spend my physical energy trying to follow up to make sure they're going to do their job. And if I'm not wasting my time managing the run, I'm able to spend my time creating the future. I'm able to spend my time designing new initiatives and solutions for our clients. And when I'm sucked into worrying about everybody else around me, that is very negative behaviors. That causes us to overmanage. So when we start overmanaging, we add up more meetings, more activities, more measurements, and we start telling our folks we don't trust you. So then they're like, well, if you're going to tell me what to do, then you own the run. And as we know, people take ownership to what they create. So then if the managers create these systems, guess who owns the run? The managers. And the managers get frustrated that how come the front line aren't doing anything? Well, we told them we don't want them to act without us telling them what to do. So it becomes this very negative cycle, which goes back to my first comment about how do you change it? You got to create a new positive experience that kills this negativity. But, trust is a lubricant in most efficient systems. You want to have trust in your systems. You want to have trust in yourself. You want to have trust in your people around you. Trust in yourself means that you understand how to do the job. You're well-trained. You understand the standards. Trust in everybody around you comes from experiences. We've won together. We know how to win together. And when you have that, your prefrontal cortex in your brain isn't firing off in many directions and sucking up your energy, wondering why some things aren't done.
So I think that gets then back to the quick wins idea, right? Because if you can start to get even some tiny quick wins, it helps to build up that trust and break down those barriers, and the team starts to win and feels good about that. So we've already touched on all sort of the three parts of the pyramid there: run, improve, and grow individually. Tell us a little bit how you ultimately arrived at this. You've been in this business for a long time. How did you eventually come up with this?
So it was actually a fluke conversation that I had with Mike Bull at Fidelity Investments. Mike's boss, Doug Sutton, came out of manufacturing, so he'd asked me to meet with Mike to look at, how can they take some of the process improvement, Lean, Six Sigma elements, and bring it to a financial service industry, which is more knowledge workers. And I remember meeting with Mike, and I have to thank Mike because even though he was told by his boss to meet with me, he did it in a very respectful way. And as we were walking around his facility, I was asking him about their processes, their performance, their leadership, their measurements, their employee engagement, and I was amazed how well they were doing everything. And that was in 2000 and 2001. And so I had visited probably a couple hundred companies by then, and I had never seen a company who had all these systems in place, and they really had it well defined. And I remember Mike, as Vice President of Operations, his passion was to spend more time with his customers to anticipate what's next for them. And afterward, he asked me, so what do you think? Where do you think we can improve? And I actually started shaking my head, and I said, I can't think of anything else I would add. You're doing everything great, honestly. And I would just be making something up to try to, get in there. I didn't want to do that. I want to be authentic with the solution. So I said, give me some time. Let me go take some time and think about it. And my thought process was, if everything was working great, what would be the next standard? What would be success beyond all these processes and systems? And what I really came down to was, if our front line behaved in a way that they owned the run, that would be the next standard. And again, Fidelity was very similar to a lot of other companies, had a lot of management activity and layers and so forth. So how do we change the management processes rather than the workflow processes to free up management to work on growth and initiatives and growth and improvements? And fortunately, Mike actually had the desire to go and spend more time outside of the four walls. I don't think that conversation would have gone as well with somebody who liked the day-to-day running. So I remember sitting down with him at TGI Fridays, Northern Kentucky, and on a napkin kind of put out the Run, Improve, Grow, because I knew I only had a few minutes to kind of explain this very complex system of strategy, management, leadership. So I knew I only had a few minutes to explain this, and he got it right away. And I remember him sharing with me at that time, he was spending 15% of his time on the grow, 45% on improve, and 40% on run. And we met again, same place, many years later, I think it was 2007, and he shared with me he's at 80% on the grow and 20% on improve. And during that period of time, I believe they grew about 500% and only added about 165% more people. So it was really, again, necessity is the mother of invention. It was a necessity that said, what's next? Unfortunately, I had a very collaborative partner that we can work with us on. So really what came out of what's next, if somebody has all these processes, all the employee engagement, and what was interesting in this, and working with Mike and his team, was their employee engagement scores improved dramatically while they were improving productivity. Remember, productivity increased 30-some-odd%, but the employee engagement scores are quality, so there was a no compromise approach. And I know Mike has shared his experience with many, many folks, so I think you should consider having him on the show at some time. I know he would be happy to do so.
I think it's a great idea. So a couple things you touched on there I wanted to ask about. So Mike grasped the concept quickly, and obviously it was very successful there. What was the first thing he did? I mean, how did he make the leap into it? So he walked away and said, Ray, that's great, I want to implement. What happened next to get him to that level of performance?
Well, piloting it in a specific area where we felt as though we can model the entire management process. So with selecting an area that not only can improve the way the workflow was done, but improve how the supervisors worked. And I have to say that was it was a transformational effort. So there was a lot of pushback from his management. I remember at that time he was really, had to deal with a lot of, I don't know where we're going, questions from their folks. I don't know what my new role is going to be. But he had a very clear vision on that. So it was really modeling it in one specific area. And most improvement efforts really take kind of a small area and say, we're going to model it here and do these small things. But it was modeling it by solving some of the boldest problems, some of the hardest problems. I like to, our strategy is to pick the high-hanging fruit, not the low-hanging fruit. So one of the areas that we selected was really solving some of the problems about how the supervisors were leading, how much autonomy the supervisors had. I remember at that time, part of their labor productivity was a challenge. So every supervisor wants to have as many people in their area so that they can make sure the work got out. They deal with the inbound mail for Fidelity. And I remember, every supervisor kept hoarding people. By the time that this was over, supervisors got together and collaborated and shared their workload and would try to spread people out and move them out of their areas and try to achieve higher performance levels. And they owned it. As opposed to every month, the managers would sit down with them and review their performance reactively. The supervisors actually got to the point where they're managing productivity, quality, scheduling every day as though it was their own business unit. But the key to that was they had the tools to succeed. They didn't feel like a victim. And a number of supervisors modeled that, and then what they did is they shared that story throughout the organization.
So Fidelity obviously is a well-known services-oriented company. To those folks out there who might be listening and say, well, it's a financial management company, it's a services company, it's an office environment. Their environment's nothing like my environment. I'm a manufacturing shop. How do you translate that kind of success into other businesses that don't necessarily fit into the same kind of mold as Fidelity?
Well, what's interesting, it was there were some folks at Fidelity who said, well, we're not Toyota, we're not a manufacturing company.
The exact opposite of what I just asked, right?
Yeah, and even, I'll tell you, even a manufacturer, when one time I was talking to a manufacturer, they said, well, we're really not a manufacturer, we're a job shop. So I think that, these are principles. These are principles around strategy, principles about management, principles about leadership. There is not a one-size-fits-all approach. I'll tell you, even within manufacturing, it's very, very difficult to take the same principles that you do on the shop floor in manufacturing and bring it to the office environment. So even within a company itself, it's very difficult. And the reason why, I'll tell you, in manufacturing is when you're producing a product, you have a drawing, you have a set of standards. We put a ton of measurements around our frontline folks, but we don't have those same set of standards around our engineers. We don't have those same set of standards around people who do quoting, purchasing. We don't have those same set of standards. I had a client, my first client, Gary Allen, used to tell me, the folks on the shop floor have the least control of the outcomes of the business because they don't design the business model, they don't determine the type of equipment we buy, nor do they buy the materials. However, they're the ones that we measured the most. But we need to use those same standards across all others. So I think that this process is applied to nonprofits. This process is applied to small companies, large companies. Yesterday I was just doing an innovation session with an R&D group of a large consumer products company that brought in their worldwide groups that at one point said, this manufacturing stuff doesn't work for us in the office. We're dealing with scientists. If you really break it down, what you're dealing with is strategy, management, leadership. You're dealing with standards, you're dealing with people, you're dealing with interactions, you're dealing with breaking down silos. If you can look at it from what problems does this solve rather than why this doesn't apply to me, you'll be more successful.
Well, I know we're running out of time here, but selfishly I want to ask one last question because I think it's really important to the overall concept, and that's, we've touched on it a couple of times, the whole idea of time allocation. So what are the world-class time allocations for leaders? If you're in these different buckets from the front line all the way up to senior management, where should you be focusing your time? And again, trying to move forward, what should you be thinking about as you make this journey?
Well, I think everybody has an MVA, which is your most value added. And I believe that when you look at people's time allocation, as a president of a company, 80% of my time needs to be spent on growth. Now, growth to me and grow is not growth in size, it's growth in relevance. As a leader, I should be spending 4 out of 5 hours a day working on the future, designing the future, seeing around the corner. As a frontline supervisor, I should be spending half of my time working on improvements, not firefighting and working on this. I don't know if we have the time allocation chart, but there's a time allocation chart that we have that we can show that as a vice president, half of my time should be working on improve, and half of my time should be working on grow. So the only item that we have, the only commodity we have that we cannot buy any more of is time. So when I look at a company and I look at the success of the future of the company, I measure it based on where are people spending their time, not their numbers. Their numbers are from decisions that they made many years ago. Where they're spending their time is going to be a good predictor of the future. So as a president, 80% on grow. As a frontline supervisor, half my time on improve.
Okay. Well, we want to open it up to our audience today for any questions. So if anybody out there in the listening audience has some questions, by all means, send them in. It looks like we might have a few coming in here, and hopefully we'll get some more. So here's a question for you. For leaders stuck in the run, it may be due to fast growth, demanding customers, and vendor issues. How do you handle that? Obviously, if you are incredibly busy and things are going well for the company, it's probably going to be hard to devote time to something like this. How do you deal with that?
Well, I think so. To get out of the run when you're dealing with a fast-growing company or a complex business, I think more issues right now have been more around the complexity of a business rather than fast growth. So both of them can be solved, but different ways. So a company that's growing fast, typically it's more of the same product. Then that one is basically creating a scalable model. How do we scale up and open up another store? How do we scale up and open up another location? Those are actually easier to manage. It's just basically do more of the same. And you create a system about scaling up. My first client grew from a $20 million business to $1.5 billion. And theirs came out of complexity. Their growth came out of buying competitors around the world with different product lines, introducing new innovative products. Where a lot of the firefighting comes in the run is not because of the fast growth, is that your systems aren't set up to support that. And I like to use the highway system. Organizations need to predict and plan out their urban development, just like highways, just like urban cities. You can have cities like Atlanta who don't do that, and then you got gridlock. Or you can have other cities who plan out their growth and put in the highway systems. So in companies that are going through complex growth, they need to step back and create a new operating model. So the operating model includes, how you buy material, includes how you trade, includes how you make the products, includes how you interact with your customers, includes how you quote. Too often they're trying to do it within their old system and their operating system. The way you have to do it is simplify it. And one way of measuring or analyzing the complexity is how many decisions do people have to make every day. If you really had a simple system, you really don't have to make that many decisions. So you're looking for all the decisions that have to be made and step back and ask the question, why do we have to make those decisions? Why don't we have a good sales, inventory, and operations plan for the month? Why don't we have confidence that we can deliver to our customers what we need? Typically, it's probably because 2 years ago, we weren't spending time looking at our improvements.
Makes a lot of sense. Here's another question for you. I think this one's pretty interesting. Most of us believe we're great performers. What if your frontline looks at you as the problem? How can we evaluate ways we might actually be the problem within our company? Now, obviously, self-introspection is always tricky.
Yeah, and I think that, I think it's a really candid conversation. One way of talking to your team about, if you were in my shoes, what would you be doing that I'm not doing? And kind of hearing the feedback. It's easy to blame your boss. So when I talk to sometimes the frontline, they always tell me about their boss and stuff. I say, okay, if you were in their shoes, what would you do? And the clarity of their answer is clear. The number one area I'll tell you that I believe that people, the top performers, get frustrated about their boss is accepting mediocrity. That is the number one frustration that I believe that many employees have about their managers, is that they're allowing poor performers to exist and they're blocking it. The other problem that I've seen, I've been there firsthand myself, is when your manager tends to manage in a silo. They create friction between departments and functions. It's more about their control than it is about success as a team. And one of the other ones is probably the employees don't feel trusted by the manager. Everything they do is wrong, they get undermined, and they don't feel supported or have a level of respect. So I think that it's a very good question that everybody has to be asking themselves is, what's my expectation of a leader, and how do they check in to ensure that they're doing it, and not getting it from people that you think that are going to give you the right answer, but from everybody else.
You touched on a thing I've experienced myself there, the whole idea that you're part of a team where you have people who don't necessarily perform up to snuff, and it does get frustrating. What would your advice be to those people who want to excel and want to succeed? Maybe they have a manager who isn't necessarily willing to take that on. What's your advice to them for how to try to overcome that and give kind of some constructive feedback to the manager and eventually solve those problems? Because it is frustrating when you're really busting your butt every day and you got people loafing and doing a bad job. Yeah,
and that's a great question. So let me give you my definition of manager and leader. Manager is somebody who is anointed with a title, who has certain decision points. They're allowed to make certain decisions. A leader can be everybody, anybody or nobody. So a leader is not based on your title. It's not based on the definition of your role on the hierarchy. So what I've seen in the best leaders on the front line is they're talking to their manager and they're helping their manager by fixing those problems. And they're not seeing that problem as just their manager's problem. They see it as their problem with solving it as well. So one of the things that I find is the best frontline leaders who help solve that is they sit down, like for example, Dave, I see this problem in our department. Here's what I want us to see for us to go to. I'm going to work with the team and getting up to this level. What I need from you is this level of support. So one of the best ways of increasing the performance of the group is modeling the right behaviors by your top performers.
Yeah, leadership by example is always a good thing.
And people follow their peers more than they follow their boss. So if you're in a role and you want to influence your team, you start modeling that performance and bringing up the majority, the average folks with you, meaning the folks in the middle. Don't try to win over the really negative ones. But if 90% of you now perform at this new higher level, it makes it very easy for the manager to see the outliers.
Makes sense. We got another question here. I think it's pretty pertinent as well. How do you create a level of respect and show your frontline trust, especially in an environment where maybe that hasn't been the norm in the past?
Yeah, I think I'll tell you, respect to me is huge. And so one is the what went well questions. So every day when we're asking what went well yesterday, and we're looking for the positives. So one of the areas that, I'm an engineer, you're software architect, I'm technical, there are people who are accountants. So we're trained to go find the problems, right? Debug the software, find the process issue, find the variance on the expense report, find the quality issue. We're not trained too often to look for the positives. And so where respect comes from is looking for those positive behaviors. And I think back to changing a culture. The way you change a culture is by demonstrating those behaviors that you want people to do. But if you keep telling them what they're doing wrong, you're never going to be able to change it, So I think that's one. The other area of respect is the way that we ask questions. So if we ask questions, have you done this? Did you do this? That assumes that there's a chance that they didn't do it. I believe that asking the right questions in a assumptive, positive way gains respect. So instead of saying, hey, Dave, did you send that quote to your customer? I'll say, Dave, hey, when you sent that quote to your customer, what new information did you learn from your interaction about their future activities? I'm making the assumption that you've already done that, but I'm looking to learn from you about things that you could teach me. And I think that's the third one, is as a leader, the way you show respect is you share with them all the challenges that the organization is trying to solve and that you're trying to solve, and you tell them, I need your help. So part of the respect is by showing your vulnerability and by you exposing yourself to say, I would like to work on more growth. I'd like to work on more improve. However, I don't have confidence that I can let go of this because of these reasons. I know you can do it, but we don't have these things in place yet. What can we do to make that happen together? I think that's one way of creating that environment of mutual respect.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think one of the things that I thought was very interesting since I've been part of the team is the whole, what needs improvement approach. Instead of saying, what went wrong yesterday or, what needs improvement? It's a much more positive way to ask the question. I see we got a few more questions coming in. Okay. How do you act in a company that has large growth goals and it seems that the way they believe they're getting there is by taking over the run? It doesn't seem that the front line feels demoralized, but it does seem that the front line feels demoralized by this. I apologize, the print is small. I'm getting old. The process may not necessarily be flawed as much as the front line view it as big brother watching and box checking procedures.
I'm trying to process that real quick. Can you move up there? So they're saying by taking over the run. Okay, so they're basically over-managing. So it sounds like to me they've got some big growth goals, and what we're going to do is we're going to over-manage. So when you do that, then people feel controlled. And one of the ways to really demoralize an organization and undermine people's engagement is to remove their autonomy.
Micromanagement, nobody likes it.
No, because what happens is people then become compliant. You tell me what you want me to do, I'll leave my brain in the pickup truck or in the car outside, and I'll come to work. So I think what you need to do is cast the vision. So back to that big growth goals. And growth goals to me aren't numbers. Growth goals to me are vision. Share with us the vision of what this organization looks like when we win. Give me a reason that we want to grow. Give me something purposeful and tie it to our customer. That gives me a sense of pride that I'm working towards something that's purposeful. That's number one. Number two is share with me the systems that we're going to have from a management system that are going to help us succeed. I mean, I can keep running harder and harder and harder and faster and faster and faster, or you can give me something that helps me go faster. As I used to have a quote in my Franklin Planner, when I used to have a Franklin Planner, it said,
you're showing your age, Ray.
I had some other time management ones, but I remember a quote on there. It says 12 motivated employees with shovels will never outperform an unmotivated employee with a bulldozer. So part of management is to give people bulldozers. Okay, so what are the tools and systems that were allowing people to go faster, not just run harder? You know, so part of management is to give them the airplane, the car, the train, some sort of mechanism to make their job easier. You know, it's technology and so forth. So I think, so one is you have to come a clear strategy, but two, you have to have the mechanisms to get there. I will tell you where I see a big gap in most management. This requires system thinking. This requires kind of the ability to architect a way of getting there. And too often we take a ranch house and we say we want to make it into a mansion, and all we do is just build more ranch houses next to it instead of designing what a mansion could be. So you've got to architect and create a vision of what this new business looks like. Now, you create a roadmap that says, here's how we go from here to here in the next 24 months. But if they don't understand how to get there and all it is just run harder, run harder, run harder, you really demoralize the organization because they don't feel as though I'm ever going to get off this you know, treadmill.
You had mentioned technology in that last question. You know, how do you think that plays into this? You know, you mentioned the idea of I can build a system and architect where I want to go, where I can just keep cranking out more of the same thing. You know, where does that fit into the mix?
Well, when I
the right way to do it.
Yeah, so when I back, and I'm going to show my age again. So back in the 1990, I worked for UPS implementing the first computerized clipboards. And it was called the DIAD system. I think it was Delivery Information Acquisition Device. And it was a very cumbersome one because many of our package car drivers never even owned a computer, never had an ATM card, been driving for many, many, many years. So it was a culture shock for them. So when I joined Johnson & Johnson, putting in the first, you know, ERP system, which back then was called Computer Integrated Manufacturing, the approach that we took was to design the new business model first. Unfortunately, it's funny because unfortunately the management team had already purchased the software and the equipment because Digital Equipment Corporation had a discount that if they ordered all the material by a certain time, they had a price break.
How did that work out for them?
Yeah, so we didn't use a lot of the software, but so my approach is simplify, standardize, and automate. So SSA, or you could do it the other way around of anyway, you can do the wording yourself. But I think that the hardest part of that process is not the automation. The hardest part is the simplification. So where technology fits in is taking simple systems that are standardized and applying technology to remove data transmissions, to remove decision-making that can be put into a flowchart and an algorithm, and to remove human error. I mean, we're prone to 100% inspections, only 98% effective. So I think that we're not trying to make technology as the solution. It's an enabler toward a simplified process. So as we've worked together on many different initiatives together, Dave, I know we take the simplify, standardize, and automate approach to everything.
Makes perfect sense to me. I'm a big believer. So I know we're running out of time here and need to wrap this up. I appreciate everyone's questions. So, you know, Ray, as we kind of wind down for today, what would you say the key takeaways are? We've covered a lot of ground. What should folks take away from this discussion today? Well,
fortunately, I was just handed a list of takeaways by my team who were taking notes as we were taking away. So thank you very much for that. So I'll be completely authentic and transparent. But I think that I trust my team, so I'll read off. But it's the stuff that they've already heard me say for many, many times. So number one, I'd say to really create a run, improve, grow culture, and to create a collaborative one that is bold and innovative, that allows us to stay relevant, is to create a management system around your top performers. So focus on your top performers. Don't build speed humps around others. Create an environment that top performers love the fact that you recognize them and you're building systems that support them rather than building systems that hold them back. So that's number one. And then kind of the action item out of there is start asking them what frustrates you on a daily basis and start removing those speed humps. The second area is really working with your frontline folks every day on your huddles and starting with the what went well. I think that creates, it actually is simple